Hello and welcome to another Recovery Month session. And we are just privileged today to be talking to Phil Valentine, who is the CEO of CCAR, about building recovery communities, recovery coaching, or as we know, anything Phil decides he wants to talk to us about today. So Phil was our original CCAR trainer, and we now feel honored to call him a friend, a mentor. He's this crazy cat in Connecticut who's also known as DJ Right Click.
That's right.
And he and his team inspire and support us in all we do. So we are so grateful. So Phil is a peer-to-peer recovery support service, advocate, trainer, implementer, promotes recovery every way. You were 20 years to this year, Phil. You were at the original recovery movement meeting.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Been recognized by Harvard and Johnson, but also by all your peers for the great work you do. And he challenged us to bring him questions today because I don't think he wanted to do a presentation. So Phil, do you just want to kind of give everybody a bit of an introduction from your mouth, not mine? And then we'll start hot seating you with lots of questions.
Oh, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Phil Valentine, but for the grace of God, haven't had a drink or a drug since December 28th, 1987. So in December, it'll be 34 years. I'm also the executive director of the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, CCAR for short, and have been with CCAR for 22 years. And hi, Peter. How are you? Have been to the UK a couple times to do a whirlwind tour of speaking, and very fond of the UK. Was there just like 2-3 years ago on a visit and circled around the country too. But super excited to share my experience, strength, and hope with anything recovery related. Super impressed with Naetha and Calliese and the UK Recovery Coach Academy and how it's taken off and the work they've been doing. The only thing I know for sure is that their heart is in the right place. And this work is really about the heart. And I would even say the art of it. We can science it and evaluate it to death, but it's really, for those of us in recovery, know that recovery is physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And oftentimes the spiritual component, however you define that, is not really regarded. But for me, that was the essence of my recovery. And literally in the thousands and thousands of people I've met since then, that they have a spiritual component to their recovery and a spiritual component to this type of work that we're doing. So super grateful to be here. 8 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast, in the United States. So I usually keep them up till midnight or 1 in the morning with our storytelling slam. So it's the least we could do is get up a little early.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for getting up early and being with us. So are you ready? We asked people at the recovery conference. We asked all the students who've taken Recovery Coach Academy. If you could ask Phil a question,
oh boy,
what would you ask him? So we have a whole mixed bag for you today.
Got it.
So we'll start off with an easy one.
Sure.
Why do you love Crocs and socks?
So those are my color today. Colors, and Sandy's on the phone on the call, I see, so I'm not sure, but actually my love with Crocs, in 2015 I hiked the Appalachian Trail. So you had your boots on all day, and then when you set up camp off the trail, you wanted to have some camp shoes. So I bought these big bright yellow size 12 Crocs, and I still have them today, much to my wife's chagrin, but I bought bright yellow because I didn't want to lose them, so that I wouldn't leave them behind. And ever since then, they're just comfortable, they're easy to put in, and I like bright colors. I don't necessarily like to conform. So I'm hopeful to get a huge array of colors like yellow, orange, hot pink, blue, green, black, everything. I want them all.
Excellent. Excellent. So I want to take you back first. So some 20 years ago, you were at this famous recovery summit and recovery advocacy. And that was, from my understanding, 20 people who'd never met, or a group of people that had never met before.
Correct.
How did you all get together?
So at the time, I think, yeah, I don't really remember who convened it. I think Faces and Voices of Recovery in the United States was a fledgling idea, and this was kind of the initial kickoff. But there was a group of people that had been funded by the government uh, um, to develop a recovery community support program. And we really came together about putting a face on recovery. So a simple an idea of all of us were very much in 12-step recovery, many of us, and we were anonymous. You know, Greg Williams has since come out with the movie The Anonymous People. So we were fascinated with the idea that we often met in church basements, but the congregation above literally knew very little about us, you know, and the spiritual work that was happening in the rooms of 12 steps. So the whole idea was to, as Bill White would say, was to develop a vanguard of people that were willing to be public about their recovery and offer ourselves as living proof that recovery is real. Because so far we could have been sitting next to you in church, we could have been in the classroom, worked beside you, coached your kids as people in recovery, and nobody would ever know or ever knew. And so now, over the last 22 years of my work at CCAR, we've put a face in recovery. So that initial meeting was to talk about how we could do that outside of the 12 steps and 12 traditions. And we had a lot of really good researched information that said that was perfectly okay. You just didn't represent a 12-step program. You didn't say, you know, I'm a representative of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, and this is the program that you must attend. We made a broader construct. We talked about a wide umbrella of recovery, and that we had every right, maybe even an obligation to say that we are people in recovery. And one of the examples, the first woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, Marty Mann, had the blessing of Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob to start the National Council on Alcoholism. And she was in recovery, and she went out and let the world know that there was a solution. And we have solution too, but now it's much more than just a 12-step solution. There are many, many pathways of recovery. So at the beginning, we all came together. Faces and Voices of Recovery was formed. There was an energy that was almost palpable, a spiritual component to it. We had a congressperson who came out about his own recovery. From there, the movement just blossomed. But it was really our federal government had the insight to fund a minimal investment by government standards, 19 recovery community organizations to see what they could do. And CCAR was one of those first ones. That was a long answer to a simple question.
That's all right. That's all right. So we got quite a few questions about peers, recovery coaches, and expert by lived experience. And so somebody said we're kind of looking at peer-to-peer services in the UK right now, but Phil wrote a blog about rejecting the word peer because you are a coach.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us what some tips and advice of changing the language to move it from peer to coach, and what's the difference?
Well, I can only tell you why we did it in the United States, is that there was a whole mental health world where people were working with others with primary mental illness, and they had adopted the word peer as somebody with lived experience of a mental illness. So we were talking more about people in recovery from an addiction, right? And so we didn't think that the title actually described our role well. The other part is I did some initial research and still believe this, is when you say peer, what do people automatically think of? And it's not somebody with a lived experience like a recovery from an addiction or a mental illness. It's someone your own age is the primary definition of a peer. And it's the other thing with peer is maybe somebody that's in the same field, but that seems to be secondary to this age related thing. So again, it didn't fit. So we really started to discuss what it is we do when we're in the recovery support services field is we coach recovery. The other part you talked about is the lived experience. And so that's also tied into the word peer, at least here in the United States. And lived experience, I like that term because if you've lived, you've had experience. So we have always said that a recovery coach is perfectly suited for people in recovery, family members, friends, and allies. And yes, the majority of our recovery coaches that we've hired, we have over 20, either in the emergency departments or the Department of Correction now, have a lived experience of recovery from an addiction. But there are a handful of people whose family members had an addiction, or that are strong allies and believe in the movement and in recovery. You know what? People in recovery don't have a corner on the market of being nurturing, compassionate, caring, questioning, curious. But somehow we think that because we've had this experience, that's it's a quality and it's like one check of the box, but it's not what we do all the time. Is just dump our experience and tell people. As coaches, we've become much more skilled at asking the right question. We will use our story when we need to. So I think about coaching recovery, and a recovery coach is a much better description than saying I'm a peer recovery support specialist. And I have no idea when you're saying, what do you do as a peer recovery support specialist? If somebody asks me, what do you do as a recovery coach? You just say, I coach recovery. Does that answer your
Sounds quite
question?
simple. Yeah, it sounds quite
Yeah,
simple when you say that.
And
Yeah.
I like that you said that it sounded simple, because Albert Einstein told us that if you can't explain something simply, you don't know it well enough.
Yeah.
And so really the depth of understanding of a topic or a concept is how simply you can describe it.
Excellent. So obviously this question comes from a commissioner within public health here, because it says, as a commissioner, commissioning peer-led interventions is inherently risky. How can a commission mitigate against those risks, or reduce or manage instead of mitigate?
So my first question to the commissioner would be, why do you assume it's inherently risky? Because that's her or the commissioner's own bias, saying that, and what he believes about recovery and believes about addiction. So he's saying basically that he's already stamped a moral attitude or something on peer-led interventions, that they're inherently risky. So that's the first thing I would question before I answered the rest of it. But what was the rest of the question?
So how can I, as a commissioner, mitigate against some of those risks, or reduce or manage them instead of mitigate?
So when they say mitigate, what do they mean? Like eliminate?
Yeah, or reduce.
Not fund, mitigate, eliminate.
I think a lot of organizations in England believe that there will be risks if they have peer-led organizations.
Can I tell you a story instead of
Yes,
like answering
we
the
love
question
stories.
directly? So early on, we were at the federal government, and this topic came up, and actually one of the administrators in our federal government said that all these recovery coaches are going to end up sleeping with their clients and we're going to have a mess. So that was their kind of moral stamp and belief about peer-led interventions, the inherent risk. So this young man, God bless him, he stood up and he said, so you're saying that recovery coaches are going to sleep with their clients? And the person goes, yeah, I believe that's a risk. And he said, well, if that's the case, then we might as well eliminate the entire field of psychiatry. And you could have heard a pin drop, because they have assumed that, the people that are performing these practices or going to do these peer-led interventions are untrained, wild cards, off the chain type of people. But when they meet people like you, Naetha, and Stephen, and Noreen, and Sandra, and Georgia, all these people, they go, this isn't what we thought. I mean, where are all your tattoos? Well, Stephen might have some tattoos all over, but who the heck knows? No, I'm just kidding. But not that that matters, but they have an image of the way these people are going to be. They haven't seen people in long-term established recovery that are contributing citizens, caring, kind, compassionate individuals. And these are the people that are going to lead interventions. So they have not done a good job of assessing what the risk is. So what is the worst case scenario? And then you ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? And isn't that already happening in the treatment world anyway? Probably their worst case scenarios. And then what is the likelihood of that happening? And that's proper risk management. And so you could have this awful worst case scenario, but might happen 1 in 10 trillion times. So do you mitigate that risk? Probably not. I wouldn't as a leader. I would say, if that for some reason happens, we'll deal with it when we get there, but it does not trump all the good work that would be done ahead of time. So for me, it's more about faith-based leadership. And when I say faith, it's about faith in the people that are working, that they're there to do the right thing, instead of fear-based lead management. So fear-based management is about mitigating everything, minimizing risk, not letting people do anything. And the last thing I would ask her is another beautiful quote from, or I say her or him, the public health official, is the quote, just share a quote from Don Coyhis. And he always says, the system is perfectly designed for the results you're getting. Are you happy with the results? So this is it. Then these peer-led interventions are one way to make a change. So what happens if your system starts to get better outcomes because of this one change? Isn't the risk worth it? And you have enough history now in the United States and other places that these changes are improving the system. They are. People are starting to get better and well. If your son was addicted, would you want them to go to this cold clinical treatment where they were allowed the same treatment that hasn't worked? Or would you like to try something new with maybe a recovery coach that can show a person multiple pathways of recovery and give them options? And I would ask this public health commissioner this direct question. But that's me. You have your own style.
That's
now
right.
You're getting me all fired up, Naetha, with this one little question. As you can tell, that's the advocate in me coming out.
Oh, well, that's really interesting because, you talked about there's already models that exist in the States, So one of the questions when we first met Phil over a year ago, I remember I told you that somebody, when I said recovery coaching, they asked me, did I recover coaches off the side of the motorway, like the RAC or AA?
Right.
That was kind of the conversation. So we had to really backtrack that conversation. So somebody said, people say recovery coaching won't work in the UK. It's too American. How would you respond?
How is it American? I mean, that would be my question is, how is it American?
Yeah.
So when I look at the concepts of recovery coaching is we actively listen, we ask good questions, we discover our manage our own stuff, and we treat people as the best resource on their own lives, right? Those are the basics of recovery coaching. I have often said that those concepts are nothing new. In fact, they're radically ancient. They go back thousands of years to like Egyptian prophets and, Old Testament stories and New Testament stories and the Buddha, everything they're radically ancient. We've just packaged them maybe in a unique way. I'm not even that sure. So they're not only not American, they're actually probably pretty darn global. That if you can come sit down next to somebody and care, compassion, and concern, that is when the healing occurs. How is that American? If anything, a lot of people would think that was anti-American. That's not what Americans are about. So, that's how I would respond to that. I just think it's nothing. We just took all our years and decades of experience standing on the shoulders of people who've come before us, and it's just really reaching out to another one in need, and so how that's universal. That's not anything that's American. But I think also now, Naetha, you guys have some, and a lot of people on this call already have some evidence that when you do this, when you coach somebody, that it works.
Yeah.
So it's and what's the harm? I mean, why not try it? Again, your system right now is perfectly designed for the results you're getting. If you're happy with those results, continue doing what you're doing.
Yeah, that's true. So CCAR is a recovery community organization, but you also have several recovery communities.
Community centers, yeah.
Yep. Can you tell us kind of what the structure is in there and what a community center looks like in Connecticut where you are?
Yeah, Recovery Community Center is simply a recovery-oriented sanctuary in the heart of the community. So we also, does the UK have like senior citizen centers?
Yeah, we have a charity called Age Concern that sort of has a few.
There's a lot of every town in the United States, I think, just about has a senior citizen center. But so that's kind of the model of a recovery community center. It's a place where people in recovery, family members, friends, and others can come and work on their recovery, find recovery resources, attend recovery workshops, anything that the recovery community wants. But it's by and for people in recovery, their family members, friends, and allies. And it's just a place where people can gather and where recovery is nurtured and fostered. So many recovery community centers across the country will have one sign as you walk in that says, "How can we help you with your recovery today?" Which we have since adopted into the recovery coaching format as the number one question as well, which is recovery coaching for us was generated through our recovery community centers that they wanted to know how better to connect with the people that were coming in. And actually, I think it was Philadelphia PROACT. They came up with that question, and they generously shared it with everyone, and it's since become one of those amazing questions. How can we help you with your recovery today? Which automatically empowers the person that they're coming in. We're not going to tell them what to do. And I think another that we can offer suggestions and will support their chosen pathways. And I think the other piece, another story is a volunteer came into one of our recovery community centers, and she raised her hand and she said, "This is the first place where you expected a hand up and not a hand out." So we weren't there just to give hand out. We were actually asked this person, "How can you help us? Too. How do you want to give back?" And so it's a give and take. So I'm a big fan of recovery community centers. We operate 5. Hopefully we can open up a few more. I think we have 169 towns in our small state in Connecticut. and probably at least a good 100 of them could all benefit from a recovery community center.
Yeah. We need a few here too, hon. We need a few here too. Well, this seems like a heavy question. Phil, can the problems of double agentry and personal charisma inhibit the growth of the recovery movement?
So what was the double what?
Double agentry. Ooh.
What the hell's double agentry?
I don't know. What's a double agent? I haven't watched a James Bond movie in a long time.
Double agentry, like competing purposes?
Maybe. Yeah.
Well, I think I think if you read Bill White's work, WilliamWhitePapers.com, he'll talk a lot, especially in Slaying the Dragon, the history of addiction treatment and recovery in America. Is he will talk that most recovery movements have failed when the charismatic leader has passed away. And so we have to really consider, and I do as a leader now for 22 plus years, what's my succession plan? And our number one foundational principle is recovery first. So people that work with CCAR or talk about CCAR, it's about when, let's say you're going to go speak at a conference or something like that, it's always about promoting recovery first. It's CCAR is the agency you work for is a distant second, and even a farther distant third is the individual. And that is like a recovery principle. It's like ego deflation, right? And journey towards humility, like Bill Wilson wrote. But that's really about being of service, realizing that you're both precious and insignificant at the same time, and that you're here to promote recovery. So is the ego going to get involved? Yeah, but of course it is. And will there be charismatic leaders that are going to rise and fall? Bill White would say, yeah, definitely. But that doesn't mean the movement's a failure. It doesn't mean the base is a failure. It means what we have discovered as a community is incredibly powerful. I didn't expect this, but I wouldn't have done this for 22 years if I wasn't spiritually guided and spiritually led. It wouldn't have happened, because my ego and my pride would have killed me and killed this movement and killed CCAR. So every day I ask for help from above. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. And there's many leaders out there that do it behind the scenes tirelessly. They're not looking to get, recognized or the next round of funding. They stay on the mission. And these are the soldiers that I work with, the warriors I work with every single day, and which you're starting to surround yourself with too. And as a force, we are incredibly powerful. Do not underestimate that. Just because people would say nay or they challenge you, the only reason they're doing that is because they see the light in your eyes and they can sense the spirit in your hearts. And that's what makes the movement. That's what makes the movement. Where that goes, nobody's going to know. All we can do is the next right thing.
Yeah. And right thing, Phil, that little bit of advice you gave me long ago, it's on the wall, and so every time we get on a Zoom call, it's right. Are you acting with respect, integrity, gratitude, honesty, and transparency, Naetha? Everything you do. And that has been a firm program, and I'm so grateful for that. So on a lighter note, have you reached 1 million subscribers on the Recovery Matters podcast and YouTube channel?
Almost. We're at 164.
Oh, excellent. So I'll do a little promo for you. If you go and listen or download the Recovery Matters podcast, like it on the YouTube, please drop a little heart or English flag in the Facebook chat so Phil knows that he got at least 3 more subscribers from us today.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So, Phil, how can the academic community support lived experience organizations? Can academics lead recovery community organizations?
Um, wow. Talk
Ooh.
about like a can of worms there, Miss Naetha, with that question. Man.
Got 22 years experience to share with us.
One time, and when I say academics, I'll go to research, right?
Yeah.
So uh, Tom Kirk, who passed away in 2020 of COVID, but he was a commissioner in Demas and a CCAR board president. He was an ally, very educated. He would often talk about wondering about research, if research was effective. And then one year at a federal government meeting, when we were getting federal funding, I asked we had the researchers and the executive directors in the room. There are like 30 of us, 15 pairs, if you will. So I asked, has there ever been any research done on the effectiveness of research? And actually a researcher answered the question, and they said there has been, and research does not improve outcomes. And so CCAR has not received federal funding since.
Yeah. As you do.
I don't know if those two are necessarily tied together, but I just put that out there. So I would never say yes or no to a question like that. I can't, because there's always, I like to live in the gray area. I think we do a lot of data, well, not a lot compared to a lot of like a clinical treatment provider, but we do know our numbers and we do know trends and we do know, but we use that more in the concept of helping to inform us than to be the bottom line, right? So it's like, we're not going to end up being bean counters where we want to bill for every dollar and know wherever, it's not like that. But if an academic is in recovery and understands the spiritual component, when you think about academia, right? Oftentimes you think about the science, the facts, the data. Again, I'll go to, where's the spiritual component? And where's your heart? Where's your soul? Where's your mind? How do you think about that? So I don't know if it's an either or question. I think it's more of a both and. I think like we have the Recovery Research Institute here in the United States with Dr. John Kelly. And his heart is to show, or not to show, but to analyze the effectiveness of recovery community centers. And he's asking questions more about recovery capital. And to me, when you talk about recovery capital, it's like, connectedness. Are you getting a job? What's your family life like? Has these things improved? Like sometimes indicators of recovery, which is a lot different than numbers and outcomes and stopping use and all that kind of stuff. So I like where that type of research is going. And Bill White for years has talked about the importance of recovery research, not treatment research or clinical outcomes, but recovery research. In the United States for many years, we had this commercial, this is your brain on drugs, and the woman would break an egg and throw it on a hot frying pan, and your brain would it would fry and sizzle in the pan. I would love to see a commercial, your brain on recovery. What does that look like? But the researchers can't answer what happens yet. When you get into recovery, they can fill libraries and volumes of what happens when your brain takes drugs. They look at all the dopamine sensors and what gets fired and all that, but they have yet to really focus on the solution. And there's 23 million Americans roughly that we think are in recovery in the United States. As far as I know, nobody's ever asked us what that's been about. Not a lot, except for Dr. Kelly, maybe Bill White and some of those. But compared to looking for active addicts and alcoholics, they find those all the time. here's $50 if you come in for our drug study. I mean, oh my God. Anyway, did that even answer the question? You just sent me down all these rabbit trails again.
Sorry, I just really want to validate all the people who've put some comments in the chat and questions live. So I'm just going to pop there. Just some feedback about the commissioning comment. Lots of commissioners believe that the people with lived experience will relapse. So that's kind of
well, I think maybe they do. Maybe that's been their experience, but that's because this part about almost leading with putting your face on recovery is so important that they see that people get well. Even in the United States, when we did a Face and Voice of Recovery did a poll many years ago, that when you said that you were in recovery, people that didn't understand the program, or the general public, most of them thought you were trying to stop. So that's why we say I'm a person in long-term recovery. And for me, that means I haven't used alcohol or drugs since 1987. And because of that, my life has gotten ... So that was the messaging that came out of that, to counteract this idea that when you say you're in recovery, people think you're still trying to stop, and that relapse is inevitable. And, you know, I often, jeepers, Naetha, these questions are very good. We often, how many have ever heard that, you have heard the saying, relapse is part of recovery? Anybody?
Yeah, that is very much still in most places in England. You'll see the stages, the cycle of change with relapse as part of it.
And the stages of change. And I've taken relapse out of our training, because relapse is not part of recovery. Relapse is part of addiction, you know? So I don't know. So that almost sets the expectation that people are going to relapse when you put it in the stage of recovery, but it's not. It's a part of addiction. It's like my cancer. I had cancer in 2010. If that comes back, it's a recurrence. It's not anything I did. The difficult part about recovery from addiction, alcoholism, and other drug addiction is that once you get into recovery, we start to gain back that power of choice. You know, that choice factor is really what fuels the moral questions and all of that. But what we're really talking about is relapse is not part of recovery. And that's one of the first works that all of these people on this call that I would say you take on, is show people that recovery is valid, that relapse is not part of recovery. I've been in recovery now for 30 years. I haven't relapsed yet. Are you afraid that I'm going to relapse when you say that? So, and then I saw another thing in the chat about, you know, this idea of this early recovery and when can you be put out there, and that varies. There's no science to say it's 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. There's nothing that can support that. The only thing that does support it maybe is that after 5 years of, and they only know this about abstinence, 5 years of abstinence, say from alcohol or drugs, that it's very similar to cancer, that the remission rate drops to the rest of the population, like 15%, you know? So, but there's no magical number that like 1 year of recovery is needed to be in the field, or 2 years. We've had people I go to the person like who's had 20 years of recovery, maybe their significant other passes away, so they go back out for a month or two, and then they put it together another 6 months. Does that person have 6 months of recovery or 20 years in 6 months? And that's it. We have trained ourselves to say that recovery is consecutive, is tabulated in consecutive years. Can it be cumulative? And that's just a question. So if that person that I know that had 20 years of recovery, relapsed, came back 6 months, wanted to work in the emergency department. Recovery coach, was perfectly capable of and met all the criteria and passed the interviews. Of course, we would hire them. We would never have set a rule that said you needed a year of consecutive recovery in order to apply. It's ridiculous. It's discriminatory. And I fully reject that notion. Do you want to send everybody in your workforce newly in recovery out there? Probably not, but you might want to, and if you did, you would just have really good coacher vision. You would have people that were checking in. How are you? This job is not your recovery. How are you? How are you taking care of your recovery? And you would start to see indications that performance was dropping. So you would ask about that as well. You know, the issue when it comes to hiring recovery coaches is not about the time in recovery. It's not about the training. It's about the hiring process. Like any other business, any other industry, any other nonprofit, it's who you hire. Just because they say they have 15 years of recovery, or they have, taken every recovery coach academy class, they could still be an absolute jerk. Hopefully you would discover that in your hiring process and not just take it on the credential and the training, but that you would hire and assess character. And if they didn't have what you think is the right time of recovery or the right training, but they were the right person, hire them anyway, and then train them and give them the experience, because you're hiring a person with a soul, with a character, with a reputation, with that, whatever. That's the person you're hiring, and you're investing in that person. You're not investing in their credential. Naetha, you're starting to irritate me. You get me all fired up.
I do. It was really funny. I got asked if I would go and facilitate like 8 groups or workshops about relapse prevention. And I said, absolutely, as long as you change the title to recovery wellness. Right? They refused to hire me because they said they had to change all the timesheets around the building with the name of the group. And I just said, we just don't want to be teaching relapse prevention.
Right.
Let's talk about recovery wellness.
Recovery promotion. We always talk about instead of relapse prevention, it's recovery promotion. It's like, what can you do to stay well? And what does well look like for you?
So recovery promotion. A lot of people say we shouldn't be out there telling people what we're doing about recovery coaching and promotion, because that could be seen as self-serving. How do you respond to that?
Gosh, these are cool questions. You've learned well, grasshoppers. No, I'm just
Thank
kidding.
You.
Holy crap. So there was a time early in my career where this woman in long-term recovery, she came up to me and said, we had an old timers conference. We had like focus on people with 20 or more years of recovery. And she came up to me and she said, so Phil, and she said this kind of like in a challenging tone, you're in the business of recovery. And I was like, I went, oh my God. No, and I just started to like backpedal and stumble. If she came up and said to me today, I would say, yes, we are. And there is and I can't think of a better business to be in, because just because you're in business does not mean you're unethical. It does not mean that you're uncaring, does not mean you're not kind. But when people associate that word business, they associate of like profit and greed and, all of that. So what you're talking a little bit is about the business of recovery. I have since framed it that it's perfectly, and this is really something I've wrestled with my higher power. So this is only my answer for me personally, is that you can do well and you can do good at the same time. And that's okay. In the Bible, I think that says the worker is worth his wages. And so you don't have to, And I mean, you could probably go out and be promoting like in Connecticut, cannabis was just legalized. There's arguing about whether what billboards can be up, but you could promote cannabis and be seen as, wow, or promoting your liquor store, your alcohol, like that's normal. But then when you promote recovery, all of a sudden you're seen as self-serving. Tell them to go piss off. I mean, it's like, how can promoting recovery be self-serving? I mean, are there people, like, to go to your earlier question, are there people that are going to take advantage of that, are going to be in it for the wrong reason? Yes. But Naetha, and I know that you're not in it for the wrong reason. We were talking about it before this. We're not in this to get rich. But what is wrong with being able to make a living to pay your bills? What is wrong with that? And if you're helping people, isn't that a win-win? And so when we started to hire recovery coaches, we said, let's pay them like an amazing wage, as best as we could do. So I think minimum wage at the time was $11 or $12. We doubled it. Yeah. And a lot of other places in the United States want to not even pay them. And don't you get what you pay for? So I mean, that's like anything, whether it's clothing, employees, whatever, you usually get what you pay for. So, and I think after we have seen more than 10,000 people in our emergency departments in Connecticut through recovery coaches that are paid well, they're paid their mileage, they have health benefits, they have all the paid holidays, they take time off, we encourage self-care, that you get a grateful employee that does work that it's hard for me to even describe, on how well they connect, how many lives they've saved, how many people have been ushered, as they walk side by side them, into meaningful, redemptive lives in recovery. So you're damn right I'm promoting recovery. So piss off. If you don't like it, go do something else.
And that was we only got through the first comment in the chat for that, Phil. No. So let's move on to number 2. So we have Noreen. She's in Scotland. Hi, Noreen. Yay. She says, I think it has a lot to do with power. I'm from Scotland, and there is a reluctance in the professionals to give away power to those of us with lived experience, but no professional qualification.
Yeah, that's the whole professional. That's absolutely, without a doubt, true. Yeah. And we have seen that. So, I get kind of creative in how I describe these things. So the clinical treatment providers are there to initiate recovery, correct? Is that the same in the United Kingdom? Yeah. So somebody goes in with a real strong active addiction and they go away to treatment and they have their recovery initiated in these agencies, centers, whatever, right? So they're released from their treatment and sent right back to the same environment they came from, correct? I see some people nodding their heads. So what's out there for them? So recovery support services is a brand new field. It's an emerging field. So just like you guys have heard my story about Joshua's knee, my son Joshua tore his ACL. He was a footballer, but I mean a soccer player in the United States, but he's a footballer. And he was a junior in high school. He had his ACL replaced. He never would have returned to the pitch and scored a winning goal his final game as a senior, regular season, off that left knee, if he hadn't undergone what? Physical therapy. Recovery support services is the physical therapy to an addiction treatment. So we are creating a brand new field through recovery coaching that is physical therapy. So, Mr. Clinical stuck-up provider that's all worried about your power struggle, we're a new field. So the
Mm.
people you send us that we can continue to rehabilitate, if you will, or give them support for their recovery to be contributing citizens to our community instead of a drain. Isn't that something you want?
Mm.
Are you going to go out into the community and help them and walk side by side with them once you release them from your facility?
Mm.
I think not. That's what we're doing.
Mm.
So I would hope I would have your blessing, because we're working side by side. We're not working against each other. And you got me all fired up, so I'm saying it a little more strongly here, but I would probably in the right circles be a little more tactful, but I would use that story to say, basically, what the heck's your threat? What is the threat here? And if people are really saying that, I went to all this school, all this training, is they might be threatened that because they see the light in your eyes and that you have the ability to actually offer your story and yourselves as a way to connect at times when appropriate, and they don't have that ability, they're a little irritated that you get to do that and they can't, because they know in their hearts that's the right way to do it.
Mm. Yeah. So Peter said the UK recovery movement really is in its early days. Sometimes in its early days, partly because we found it hard to engage with enough people in long-term recovery as part of the movement. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how you've kind of engaged some long-term recovery into the movement?
Well, you just keep doing it for 20 plus years. So the people you started with are all in long-term recovery.
So you said I gotta wait 20 years now.
Yeah, exactly.
More to go.
All these people that you're helping get into recovery, 20 years from now, they'll all have 20 years of recovery. So no, I think it's I think one of the ways to engage that was Bill White was very helpful to the entire movement when he talked about, at least for me, this is what I remember, that you don't have to engage every person in long-term recovery. You only have to engage a few.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of like finding everybody and trying to convince everybody. If somebody doesn't want to join for whatever reason, you say, great. And then I respect that. And then you find somebody, and you're already seeing this, Naetha, that people are joining your movement because it resonates with you. That was exactly, it resonates personally with people. And that was exactly what happened in the United States. Now, through like the pandemic and social media, there's more people able to hear the messaging than ever before. And there's going to be people that are going to say yes and nod their heads. I like this. This is what I believe. This feels true. And other people that are threatened or don't feel it's for them, and they're going to challenge and they're going to attack. And that's okay. That's the warrior spirit in all of us, to do the next right thing, to continue to move forward and to say next, it's okay. But this is the calling on my life. This is the purpose of my life. And I'm going to follow it because that's where I believe I'm supposed to go. It's hard, very hard to argue with that, and if people, and, I guess the other analogy, I think I heard it in church, it was around, they're talking about the Holy Spirit being water. And I think like the recovery movement is water, right? And so if you're going down a stream or a brook and there's a big rock, the water doesn't stop at the rock and try to like move it away and just stop. Exactly, Georgia. It just flows around. So if you got somebody standing like that, you recovery coaches are a bunch of a-holes. You don't know what you're doing. Get the freak on. Well, we're clinicians. You just flow around to say thank you for your thing and continue downstream. But and the other thing that one of the people that work for us, she talked about, when somebody throws you a grenade like that, just let the grenade roll by. Don't pick it up and pull the pin. Just let the grenade roll by. Just kind of like the flow of the stream of the flow.
I'm aware your time is very valuable. So how much of your time have I got?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, my next meeting is at 9:30.
So what time is it there now? So I've got you about 10 minutes.
No,
okay, 10 minutes.
No, you have 36
Oh,
minutes total if you want.
yeah.
But
Okay,
you-
excellent.
Mhm.
Cool. So let's see. Georgia wrote, we don't tell cancer patients to get over it. How can we change? How can we change it from a moral and lack of willingness to what it truly is? This really frustrates me.
Exactly what you're doing now, and which is offer yourselves as living proof that recovery is real. The only way that people will change their opinion of what recovery is like is to interact with recovering people. It's not rocket science. So I see even like Kevin Schuler, he's our emergency department recovery coach program, is on the call, but
Yeah.
he knows very well that we can change the culture of, say, in a very hostile, recovery hostile emergency department just by our presence.
Mm.
Because we go in, we act polite, we're there to help, we're focused on the recovery. With an EE, we're focused on recovery in general. I
Mm.
think Sandy, my wife, is on the call too. She works at a campus, and
Mhm.
she has seen that as she just continually brings the recovery messaging, that people start to gravitate towards it, because recovery messaging is about healing, hope, overall wellness, citizenship. They're very powerful concepts. And when they're told in the right way, and we see Megan's on here too, of course,
Mm.
that they can have an incredible impact on people. So it's really about one person at a time, each
Mm.
one, teach one. And as you teach one, your efforts get multiplied and it becomes a movement. The movement isn't about an individual. The
Yeah.
movement is about many, 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 many individuals replicating themselves and staying on messaging, which is to me about recovery first.
Mm. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think Sandy's ears might have been burning on Saturday because we met a young man who was off to Liverpool University, and he felt like he was the only person in recovery where he was going. And I spent a few minutes and showed him Sandy's Freshers Week arrival at her lovely recovery building at UConn. And I said, if you want to figure out what this is, I am more than happy to connect you. And he was just amazed looking at kind of all the stuff that Sandy up there is doing for young people. And I think it also led into, we heard the term on y'all's podcast about pediatric recovery when you were talking to Greg, who did the anonymous people.
Mhm.
And I was just like, wow, we really need to help our young people. So
Mhm.
yeah, Sandy, your ears should have been burning because we were just singing the praises of what collegiate recovery can be. So yeah, thank you for what you do. So one issue with services in Scotland is to do with dual diagnosis. If you present with addiction, you can't get help with your mental health and vice versa. Does the Recovery Coach Academy have a strategy for people in this situation?
Um, so it's our coaches are always trained to go case by case. So it's hard to describe like I'd have to know more about a specific situation. However, I am very clear and I make no apologies that our focus is on recovery from alcoholism and other addiction. That is our wheelhouse. When we start to get into serious mental illness and diagnosis, we are out of our lane. And that is the time for us to refer and to advocate. But it's not to necessarily coach. A lot will depend on the person and the scenario, but to just suffice it to say that happens here too. And it's, oftentimes it's whether the person identifies with the addiction issue first or the mental illness first too. A lot of times the system wants to label people a certain way. um, I think of myself like I was 20 plus years in recovery working at CCAR, and I was describing my teenage days of like being very anxious. I couldn't really talk to girls. I had sweaty armpits that like made me break out, and as my face broke out, I got more sweaty armpits and my anxiety rose. And this woman says, "Oh, you could have been diagnosed with social anxiety, and I had never even heard that term. 20 years in recovery, but I was identified as having an addiction issue first, like with alcohol and cocaine and marijuana and stuff. So I was primarily that. And since I've come to realize that maybe I thought everybody felt the same way, that they were, adolescent teenagers, that everybody had this anxiety. And maybe mine was more to a different degree than anyone else. I don't know. So, but if I had gone to the system, I might have been diagnosed and thought of myself a certain way. So that's what we have to work with as recovery coaches. Again, changing the system. The system is perfectly designed for the results it's getting. So let's design a new system that works for us as coaches. And as I encourage all coaches to stay connected with one another. So if you do have people that are quote unquote dually diagnosed, that you learn from each other the best way and the lessons learned, that there's not a concrete answer that one process fits all, that different people have different needs at different times, and how we're there to support that would be a lot of the art of recovery coaching. And I'm not saying that if people have a serious mental illness, we abandon them either. That's sometimes people hear that when I'm talking. What I'm saying is, this is not our lane, but we will do our best to connect you to the people so you're in the right lane to get the help that you need.
And I think what's so important to us with recovery coaching is, like, even though we refer somebody into a service or to get some mental health or support, we don't disappear.
Right.
We're still there. And I think that happens a lot. It's either vice versa, either or
Right.
here. So that's been a new concept for a couple of people, and we've kind of done that and stuck around. So yeah.
So you're learning.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I am learning. I feel like the Karate Kid sometimes, it's like that. Yeah, you called me grasshopper, and now I feel like, oh, I need to go wax the car or something.
No. That was from the show Kung Fu. When you can take the pebble from my hand, grasshopper, you can walk the earth.
Yeah. So just a couple of questions from our lovely students who've already done some training with us. I've seen people around that I think would really benefit from at least knowing that recovery coaching exists. It's of course up to them what they do with that information, but I don't even know how to bring it up or introduce the idea. Do you have any suggestions for both introducing it to people who are looking for help or introducing it to organizations that could benefit from having it?
Naetha, you answer that question.
Oh, I knew you'd do this to me at some point, because you always do. So let's see. Well, I guess for me, the thing about recovery coaching is I trained and I was an LCDC, and then I did some professional coaching, and none of that was my jam. Something always felt off. And when I kind of got involved with recovery coaching, when I could be somebody's friend and their ally and their mentor and use resources I had, that was why coaching just fit, So I guess to both individuals and organizations, it is just about really, it is that encompassing package of, like you said, the art, but also being able to pull on allies and resources and other wider things to help that person move forward. And if we're not doing that, I don't feel like I'm doing the right thing,
So how would you promote it to these places?
Well, Phil, I can get you to do a live ad right here. How about that?
Again, I think it goes to that whole water analogy too, that you present the concepts as you understand them to the best of your ability. And I believe when you're walking the spiritual path, the right people are put in the path at times. There'll be barriers, of course, but for the most part, what we're quote unquote selling is really easy to sell. It's because it's there's so many benefits to it. So I would just see if they're interested. This is the new concept, and then I would go from there. And if we've actually, as I think you're starting to find out, is we don't really have to be active about going out there and promoting it. That's a lot of ways, like the process of recovery, attraction rather than promotion. So people are starting to be, after 20 years, we have more than we can handle. And it's all not anything we're doing to generate leads or interest. People are just interested.
It's really interesting because I kind of, at first, I guess I wanted to bang my drum, and I was so passionate about it. I just wanted to really, so when I got resistance or barriers, and then I just kind of sat with myself, and anybody I spoke to who approached me about it, I always ended the conversation. If not now, when you're ready to have a recovery ready conversation, the door's open. And I just started leaving things like that all the time. And sure enough, like you said, 6 months down the road, you know, oh, can we pick up that conversation? And I'm okay with that. You know, as long as the light bills stay on, my family's fed, that's all that matters at the moment. Just we're here to have that conversation. So yeah. Let's see. I'm sure you know what Naetha and Calliese are doing. How can we, as their CCAR students, help them move this forward? Sarah Williamson, good question.
Well, you'd have to ask Naetha and Calliese. So you're like, how could I help you with your Recovery Coach Academy today? I mean, ask them. I don't know what they need per se. I think they just need people to join the vanguard, to be willing to offer themselves as living proof that recovery is real. And if that's not your gig, that's not what you want to do, then help promote recovery coaching in general. You know, I think, and testify to all of that. So, but ask them, how can we help? And I'm sure they'll have things for you to do.
That's true. Oh, my job list is going out to our little Facebook community if you'd like to help. So Phil, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and coming to share your golden nuggets. And of course, I kind of like to get you on a conversation when Sandy is sitting in the background, because she'll often give you a good elbow, won't she?
Yeah, she will.
So yeah, but thank you for all you do. Thank you for being a part of our lives and for spreading the gift of recovery with us so we can spread it with other people.
Right. And recovery is contagious. Yeah.
So Recovery Matters podcast. We're going to see how many. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Where we love the CCAR blog, we love your writings, and we think it's great information. Anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, just visit us on our website, CCAR.us, and you can contact me or anybody if you have more questions about what we do here in Connecticut. And thank you guys, the UK Recovery Coach Academy. What a breath of fresh air you are. You guys are just inspiring us and encouraging us. So I'm so appreciative of all the work you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please feel free to reach out if you want to learn what we've learned from Phil. Come learn with us. And we don't just offer training, we offer a community. And that's the difference. So yeah.
There's a great tagline. Love that.
That was a quote from a feedback from our students. They said, this just isn't a training course, it's a community. And
perfect.
we were like, da-da.
There you go.
So yeah, excellent. Feel free to come hang out with us anytime, Phil. Thank you all so much for joining. And Sandy, Megan, everybody in the States, Kev, thank you so much. Have a great day.